Vladimir Putin may have just signaled that he has reached the end of the road on diplomacy and is going to solve this war on the battlefield. Now, I've been warning about this for weeks and weeks, actually for even longer than that, but especially since the Trump administration has come into office, that if the Western side didn't get its act together, and if the West, between the United States, Kiev, and Brussels with the rest of Europe, if they didn't come to some kind of unified agreement, then there was going to be trouble, because Russia was in the unequivocal dominant position here. They had all the military leverage, they had all the diplomatic leverage, economic leverage, et cetera. Anything you want to talk about, they had all of the strength. If the West side didn't acknowledge that and come to that reality and come to some kind of a negotiated settlement that would be ugly right now, then the alternative was that the Russian side would conclude there's no more value in talking about diplomacy, and then they're going to use their military force to solve it on the ground. There was a signal from Vladimir Putin just a couple of days ago in the Russian port city of Murmansk, where they have a naval base there in the Arctic region, where it seems that he may have said just that. And connected with a bunch of other information we have also of recent days, then I think that we're going to start seeing something very soon on the ground, that things change. Signals are one thing, and every time a signal has been sent, there's an opportunity to send a counter signal back. So we are still basically in the 11th hour, the final minutes before it's possible, before it becomes impossible to have a negotiated settlement that is just ugly for the Ukraine side. Because the alternative is going to be that Russia is simply going to take on the ground everything it wants. And I promise you that what he's going to take will be far more than what's on the table right now diplomatically. Now, let me first show you the key point here, because Putin has often been kind of talking in ethereal ways and kind of reading between the lines kind of situation. These comments that he's about to make right here are among the strongest he's made, maybe the strongest, especially on the last part of the clip that I'm about to show you. You'll see he's, first of all, talking to some of the sailors of a submarine, and I think the 155th Marine Brigade, one of the commanders is actually in the room here. And in the process of explaining what he's about to, he sets up by saying, hey, we've been trying to get this negotiated for a long time. We tried to get this settled in Istanbul early in the war in April of 2022, but the West side wouldn't have it. So that's the context of the comments you're going to see here, and then watch where it goes from there.
Former Prime Minister Mr. Johnson convinced the Ukrainian leadership that they needed to continue armed struggle to the last Ukrainian, essentially, in order to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. Apparently, he forgot that there are units like yours, that there are assets like your submarine. He either forgot or simply does not fully understand what the Russian people are, what is in our people's hearts and souls when it comes to the security of the motherland. As for what is happening today, it is basically clear as well. Along the entire line of combat contact, our forces hold the strategic initiative. Not long ago, I said, we will press them, and there is reason to believe that we will defeat them.
Now, that's what he said there. There's some other, actually a lot of other translations are not that we will defeat them, but this one here says that we will finish them off. So apparently in some of the Russian language, some of the translations have been that it was much stronger than that they're going to finish off the Ukraine troops. Now, you may say, okay, maybe that's just hyperbole, especially if you're looking through a Western lens. We say strong stuff all the time, especially if you've been seeing the Europeans here of late. They've been saying stuff like Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, obviously Zelensky. They make all kinds of bold statements all the time that are never backed up on the ground. They're never backed up in reality. That's not the case here. We need to understand this is not the situation with the Russian president. He is much more calculated in his words. And for him to use strong language like this is very unusual, because he's far more diplomatic in nearly all of his other comments, even when he had some strong feelings about certain things here. And then let's look at the context with which those statements are being made. Now, he mentioned that he has a strategic initiative all along the 2,000-kilometer front. That is validated by a look at any map. Even if you go to the Institute for the Study of War, where they have terrible analysis, but they have good maps, and you see the same thing. You see they're showing where the Russians are making advances nearly all across the line, and everywhere there's a couple of places where Ukraine has launched a couple of tactical counterattacks, but they all come to nothing, as I've been telling you from the beginning, as they can do anything different. They simply can't. They don't have the capacity to sustain anything they may gain. They may catch the Russians by surprise in certain tactical areas, and they, like in the city of Toretsk, I've showed you that over the last few weeks. The Ukraine side went in, they took back a portion of the city. I said it was doomed from the start, so it turned out that way. Not hard to figure out, because the Russians have the advantage in every category that you need on the ground. Well, taking it off the tactical, but go up to the operational or strategic level, and apparently the United States intelligence community has the same opinion. In the annual threat assessment published earlier this week, the U.S. intelligence community has said, in an unclassified version, said Russia in the past year has seized the upper hand in its full-scale mission of Ukraine and is on a path to accrue greater leverage to press Ukraine and its Western backers to negotiate an end to the war that grants Moscow the concessions it seeks. So that validates everything that I've been telling you as well. And this is from the Office of Director of National Intelligence, the cumulative of all 18 American intelligence agencies. The consensus is that view right there. And it is not hard to figure out here. That makes sense because we've seen it. And then now that we see additional information that shows on the ground that Russia may have calculated that not just that statement by Putin, but actions as well. You may recall that a little bit what was it, a week or so ago? Yeah, 1 week ago, you had Gerasimov, the chief of the Russian armed forces, went in his field uniform to the Pokrovsk area, where he was talking about what was going on the Eastern Front there. You had this information here come out. Also, I think it was, this is a couple of days later, I think it was on the 23rd of March, that there was a concern from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine that the Russian armed forces will launch a simultaneous offensive in the Sumy and in the Zaporizhia area. That's in the north and in the far south of that 2,000-kilometer force. There was some concern. The second direction is Zaporizhia, where Russian armed forces have a very powerful grouping. A simultaneous strike in the north and the south could lead to a collapse of the front. And then you have this is actually today's news. This is on the 29th of March. This is Zelensky has said that he sees that Russia is preparing a new offensive in the coming weeks to strengthen his negotiating position. So the AP reports. Yeah, folks, it ain't about strengthening a negotiating position anymore. The Russians didn't need to strengthen their negotiating position. They already had the dominant position. There was no more question about it. Anyone who's willing to look at this situation honestly and legitimately, apparently like the genuine U.S. intelligence community, they see the same thing we do. And of course, they see a lot more than I do because I don't have access to any classified information at all. They have access to everything. And that's what they're saying publicly. And I have it on good authority that they've been saying that for a long time. That's not something new. It's not like, okay, well, now the Trump administration is in, so we're going to say something that matches what he wants to say. I've talked to certain sources that say no. As a matter of fact, that's been their consistent view even during the Biden administration. So they knew the truth then, and yet instead of acknowledging what's patently evident on the ground, they continue to have this fiction that, well, I know what you guys say, but we're going to go with this other direction here. And we're just going to hope that somehow it changes different. As I have said on numerous occasions, and we'll repeat here, I think that is both unwise, it's foolish, and it's immoral. Because that just says the people of Ukraine that we allegedly support and care about, we don't care anything about them. They can just keep dying by the thousands every day. And it's no concern. Apparently nobody in the Biden administration lost a minute of sleep about this gross contradiction between what your own intelligence community was telling you and what you can view on the ground. Just look at it, any kind of YouTube show like ours or other thing else, or just look at where the front line is. Look at the Institute for the Study of War. All you had to do is look, it's there. And instead, we decided not to look. We didn't want to see it. We don't care about that kind of stuff. Well, in addition to that stuff by Gerasimov and the reports even from today, Putin himself also gave an indication in terms of this Sumy offensive that was mentioned in that second article I just showed you, that, yeah, he actually gave an order for that. And this is an unusual for Putin because he was wearing his camouflage uniform, which I have not seen him do at any point during this entire war. So that should be a signal to you in the Sumy area.
I very much expect that all combat tasks of our units will certainly be fulfilled and the territory of the Kursk region will soon be completely liberated from the enemy. Our task in the near future, as soon as possible, is to completely defeat the enemy, who is entrenched and still fighting on the territory of the Kursk region, to completely liberate the territory of the Kursk region and restore the situation on the state border. And, of course, I ask you to consider the creation of a security zone along the state border in the future. I would also like
that security zone along the state border, if you look under the Kursk area, that is the Sumy area, which is where the concerns are that there's going to be a northern front. I also think that it could come in the Chernihiv area just to the west of that, because that's actually provided militarily the greater threat to the Russian side. I would actually argue they may go in there. Now, they have been, even as of today, they're continuing to push further already in the Sumy area. So that is unfolding as we speak for certain. But I think that there could be bigger targets in mind for the Russian side, even in the north. Now, so all the signals, both verbal and physical on the battlefield, Russia is showing that, hey, we're serious about this. You know, we've been revealing to you for a couple of months now that there's been large formations by the Russian side forming out of contact in the north and in the east, matching and lining up with what we're hearing right now. So it's not just that they can start pushing harder. They have huge forces, allegedly, out of contact that could be applied to an already weakened defensive lines. That's so important to understand here, because the view of many in the West has been that Russia has only taken whatever it is, 22% in 3 years. It's been this creeping offensive, and that's all they're going to do because that's all they can do. But now then there's evidence that shows, no, they have actually been pulling their punches. They have been doing this slow and methodical thing because it highlights firepower over, these meat wave for movements that are often ascribed to Russia, which they almost never do. But it makes good PR press in the West, and we love to make Russia look bad, so we keep saying it does, even though there's not actual evidence on the ground towards that end. But now then, in these weakened areas, we have two at least identified publicly large formations of Russian forces. And just bear in mind that the initial invasion force was probably somewhere around 75 to 110,000 or so. No one knows for sure the right number, but it was relatively small. There are two forces of that size not in contact on top of the roughly 600,000-700,000 that are already along that 2,000 line of contact. Doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you put that kind of pressure on weak points in the north and in the south, on top of what's already there, on top of the limitations that the Ukraine side has in manpower, in artillery systems, in weapon systems of other kinds, ammunition, air defense, all of those things, that you could have a breakthrough, that you could have a collapse of the front. And just like that article did warn, that you could have an absolute collapse. And if you get a collapse in either the north or the south, historically speaking, you have the possibility that the entire line of defense rolls up and crumbles. And of course, as I told you, just physically speaking, if you have a big breakthrough like that, beyond the lines where the fortifications are and where the defensive lines are, you have the open country to just drive into after that. And then how's anybody going to stand with that? Because you can't move reinforcements anywhere. You can't move your reserves from one place to another. It's game over, folks. That's what we're at here. This idea that Russia, I saw some reports this morning that said that the Ukraine side feels that it, kind of gave a warning, and some on the Western side that this war could drag on until the end of 2026, but then they're not going to be able to sustain it. 2026, what are you talking about? The end of 2025 is one other source said. You might not even get to the summer, folks. If this does kick off the way that they're saying, and it could come within weeks, this war could be over within weeks or a couple of months. It's that serious. Now, that is an honest rendering of what's happening. You have our reports here, which we give you all the time. You have a number of other reports that we cite. You have the U.S. Annual Threat Assessment. It's pretty valid, pretty reasonable source to base upon. That's just the situation that we face. Now, why then do you have the European side coming to a rather different viewpoint? Now, one of the frustrations that Sergei Lavrov has, he said, despite all the things that we see here, all the things that we're talking about, they seem to be on somewhat of a different sheet of music.
Europe is now taking a completely different path, just as in the times of Napoleon, in the times of Hitler, and the Crimean War. It is once again showing its eagerness to inflict a strategic defeat on our country. By pumping the Kyiv regime with weapons, London and Paris, especially the two leaders, Starmer and Macron, with the support of a not-so-powerful choir from the Baltic states and several other countries, are not only talking about continuing to supply Ukraine with weapons, but also about some kind of coalitions of the willing, and about deploying a so-called peacekeeping mission, or a mission to ensure Ukraine's security after the war ends.
So, see, he's trying to like tie some things from the past, and it's saying, things of the Great Patriotic War, which is what the Russians call World War II. And he's saying, you guys are talking about this coalition of the willing. You're talking about having peacekeepers, all of which they have categorically refused, and in fact have said over and over does not get to the core reasons of the war. Russia said that they want to end the war as long as the core causes of the war, the root causes, are addressed and solved. One of the absolute central root causes is the idea that you're going to bring NATO inside Ukraine. Now, what sense does it make for us to sit there and continue to say we're going to bring NATO troops inside of Ukraine and as in call them peacekeepers or whatever else, but you're putting physical troops from NATO countries inside the Ukraine, and somehow you think that's going to pass the smell test. Somehow you think that from a position of strength that the Russians are going to allow this, that they're going to come to a negotiated settlement that says, yes, you can come in, or we won't shoot you. Now, you may think, well, that's just Russia being hyperbolic. They're making all these claims. It's not. It's like the straw man, that they're saying stuff that the Europeans didn't actually say, and they're finding fault with it, whatever. That's not the case here. And don't take my word for it. Take Emmanuel Macron.
These reassurance forces, part of the Franco-British proposal from several weeks ago, are not intended to be peacekeeping forces. I clarified this point in response to one of your colleagues yesterday. They are not meant to be forces stationed on the front lines or forces that replace the Ukrainian army. Instead, they would consist of troops from certain member states, not all, as some do not have the capacity or the political conditions to do so. However, these forces would be deployed in strategically pre-identified locations with the Ukrainians, providing long-term support, European reassurance, and serving as a deterrent against potential Russian aggression.
So he says right there, yeah, we want NATO troops. Oh, they put the fig leaf of saying, well, it's not a NATO mission. So, and Trump has already said there's not going to be any Article 5 associated with that if you do. But still, it's NATO troops under the fig leaf of reassurance forces. They even came up with a new phrase that has never existed before and should never have existed to put inside there. Who's it going to reassure? Okay, look at the definition. Just look at the logic of what Macron is trying to say here. And these 30 nations, by the way, it's not just the one man. 30 nations met in Paris this week to talk about this stuff. A reassurance means that you are going to reassure the Ukrainian leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, that Russia won't attack in the future because they'll know that they have the European troops, whether NATO or not, to deal with. Meaning that this will be a security guarantee of sort because, well, Russia's never going to risk actually going to war against us. So these troops will be in there. Now, it's laughable on its surface. It's even more laughable when you dig beneath the surface, because recall that in December, I think it was December, early January, that Zelensky had said he wanted 200,000 peacekeepers to go in to monitor this stuff. And then they started talking a little bit more, and then some of the European leaders started going, yeah, about that appetite suppressant. Okay, 100,000. We'll talk about 100,000 here. And then they start getting closer to this summit here, and it turned into, or maybe 30,000. Yeah, that's it. That's the number. That'll be a deterrent to, well, in terms of actual troops on the ground, it may only be about 10,000. That's where we're at right now. That's what they're talking about. And when he says not on the front line, Macron just did, there's some distance inside the country, I think, like Dnipro, and then some in the far western part of the country near Lviv, way over on the western border. And it's just a mockery of any kind of logic or attempt to be reassuring anything, because Russia obviously doesn't fear anything from the Western European countries, whose military forces are not even as good as what the Ukrainian forces are. Ukrainian forces, of course, have been decimated, and they're very weak, and a lot of the fighting power is low, but at least at some of the key leader level, they actually have experience in fighting this war here. And they do deserve a lot of credit for being incredibly brave and fighting against incredible odds. They're just absolutely insurmountable, and yet they still fight with extreme tenacity and bravery. I've heard from some folks on the Russian side who still marvel at how hard the Ukrainian side's fighting in this, and they do respect them as a worthy opponent. They don't have that same view toward the Europeans, who have no combat experience. And I'm telling you, reading about it is one thing. I can tell you from personal experience, reading about it is one thing. Living it under fire is a very different situation. And my own personal experience, the gulf between the reading about and studying about and when I actually did it was relatively small. The gulf between what the current Western forces, and this would include me if I was still in uniform, is dramatic. It's huge and off the charts. The nature of war and modern war has advanced so far beyond where it was before this war started off. It's hard to even understand. And only those who are living through it on a normal rotating daily cycle, the ins and outs, the pluses, the minuses, this works, and then the other side finds a counteraction to that, and then we find a counteraction to that, then they iterate, reiterate, etc. Only those who are living through it can really appreciate the distance and the difference between where it was and where it is now. We are way, way behind the timeline here. The Russians know it. They're aware of that. And so that's why they don't fear any kind of reassurance force, and why I think that they are probably coming to the conclusion that you have Donald Trump, who has come in and talking about wanting to end the war. And you've heard him say here, even in the last week or so, that his target date is still active. He wants this over by the 100th day of his term. Over, finished. I think that's technically 30 April. So he's already saying, I want this deal done. So there is no reason why anyone in the West, anyone in Ukraine should say that, hey, we need to keep adding something in here, this deterrent force or something that's going to compel Russia to come to an agreement that's counter to their interests, that they don't have to concede to. And you're still mentally trying to make the case for that. And it's just beyond crazy. But there's one thing that's a little bit more beyond crazy. I had to watch this clip several times that I'm about to show you. This is from yesterday in Paris. This is Volodymyr Zelensky. After he had been through this Coalition of the Willing conference and all that kind of stuff, he was being interviewed by France 24 on a really nice set. You're going to see the Eiffel Tower in the background. The camera's going to be panned. It's kind of movie-like. It's really cool. And I may even play this for you twice, but listen to what he said yesterday in Paris, France.
Can I ask you about the reliability of the United States under Donald Trump as an ally? He for a brief period, he cut off military aid and intelligence support. You've said yourself a few minutes ago that that the Americans have been swallowing Russian narratives. Can you trust them to support you in the way that you want and need? Or is it the case that actually the people, your better friends, are here and gathering here? And clearly they would not be gathering here if they trusted America.
Ви знаєте, коли ви рахуєте дні цієї війни,
the days of this war and the number of people that you've lost,
точно це
and
знаєте,
you know exactly how many,
у вас
then
немає
you
ніяких
don't have any
сентиментів
sentiments
до дій
with regard to the actions of this or that state. There's just an approach about how you can go through this with dignity, survive, and defeat the evil that is sitting in the Kremlin. At the end of the day, Ukraine will win, and they will lose everything. You'll see that. I'm convinced of that.
Wow. Even now, after all that's happened, you have Zelensky sitting on this platform and saying, we're going to win. This evil that's sitting in Moscow is going to lose. You'll see it. I believe that. And I believe him. I believe he does believe that. And that should be the final signal that the Trump administration sees that says, we're done with you. You are detached from reality to such an extent that it's irreparable. If you still want to say with conviction that you think that somehow all of this stuff is going to turn out and that you're going to win, you are so delusional that you can no longer be considered a reasonable partner in trying to find an end to the war. And so I think that Trump should just say, you guys have it. And in fact, tied in with that, the cocky question from that presenter that started off at the beginning shows the attitude of the European Union and the European sides altogether. You know, he was saying, you know, who's your friends? Because, you know, can you trust the Americans? You know, I think that really together here, we are the ones that can be counted on. Well, you know what? I think Trump should take the whole clip there and say, yes, you guys, good luck with that. You don't want to follow my lead. You don't want to bring it into this. You don't want to make the hard concessions that are necessary to get this war over with. Fine. I'm not going to compel you. You're a free, independent country. You can do whatever you want. Europe is your own partner. You guys can do whatever you want in your own national interest. Have at it. Have at it. That's what I would recommend. That's what I think he should do, because he's almost being compelled to do that, because everything Trump is trying to lead into, these guys are pushing back on. And see, this is part, if I argue, and I think convincingly, that Zelensky is totally detached from reality and claiming he's going to win, so too are the Europeans, who think that they can reassure Ukraine to some extent that's going to be plausible and palatable with the Russian side. That you can say, hey, we can just ignore what Trump is saying and keep supporting and keep going on. I think France came up with another $2 billion package as part of this. The Germans have recently offered a new package. UK has said they're going to provide more during this calendar year than they have at any point during the future. You guys are literally trying to, with a dump truck, throw money into a burn pit, because there's no rational path for any of this. And for the President Trump to keep on trying to say, hey, we're going to try and work with you, we're going to try and offer this or that, when you see how far detached they are from where the United States is. And listen, you heard, I think it was Witkoff that said a week or so ago that or maybe it was Mike Waltz, national security advisor, that the U.S. and Russia were narrowing their differences. Well, you see, after all this coalition, the willing stuff, the U.S. and the Europe side are getting even further apart. And I'm going to ask you, which one of those two diverging views is more closely aligned with reality on the ground? I mean, the answer is self-evident, but somehow to even these otherwise really intelligent people, well-educated guys who have grown up and, you know, succeeded politically, they cannot come to the most elemental, basic, fundamental, hardcore power reality on the ground. And it is just astounding that the bill payers for this are going to be the Ukrainian people. So you're going to send the Ukraine side out there every day. Hundreds of them are going to die every single day for your fiction, for your Hollywood script that you want to write for a movie, that you're just going to script in how those darn evil Russians are just going to collapse and, you know, going to come wring in their hands and say, okay, Mr. Europe, whatever you want us to do. I mean, that's the ending that they're trying to craft and to author. But reality doesn't care about movie scripts. The reality is you keep sending men physically into battle under those conditions, and they're going to send them home in a body bag every day. And that's just until one day you're putting the situation is going to be, and I think that we're at that day. which is, what do you think that Russia's going to do? What does any rational thinking person who's not connected emotionally to either side, say everybody else in the world, what do they think the Russians are going to do? When you have all the negotiating leverage, you have a willingness to have a negotiated end to this again, as you have several times during this war, to include in the years before it, and then it gets rejected. It's been rejected every time. Ukraine has lost over 1 million men because of our unwillingness as a Western bloc, Ukraine, United States, and Europe. We have refused to be reasonable at the expense of this. And now then the Russians, who, to their credit, it's hard for me to imagine why they would have done this. I don't know that I would have in the circumstances, but they gave one more chance for negotiated settlement. And now it looks like that has been breached based on the comments that Putin has made, based on the fact that we see military movement. There's been a lot of information flowing around on Russian telegrams that troops are on the move, that people are being mobilized, that gives credibility to these public statements that we've seen here. It looks like something is getting ready to happen. And just from a military analysis and from a historical perspective, as well as a conventional look at what's happening right now, you put that kind of pressure in a concerted way on either the North or the South, or both simultaneously, something's going to break. Something is going to break. There's just no chance for the West right now. And they are condemning, by Europe and Kiev, they are condemning Ukraine not just to lose the 4 administrative borders of the 4 provinces that were annexed in 2022, but almost certainly up to the Dnieper River, probably beyond it in the south, probably will go all the way to Transnistria. We'll take Odessa, we'll take Kharkiv, and we'll probably come right up to the gates of Kiev. And one can only wonder if at some point sanity returns at least enough for capitulation before the Russians are faced with, should we also take the capital city? They couldn't do it in 2022. They only had a fraction of the number of troops. I don't know that they ever intended to conquer the city itself. They didn't apply enough troops. If they did, then they were badly mistaken on what it takes to do that. They won't make that mistake a second time, because if they come up to the Kiev, then you're talking they're having 700,000, 800,000, 900,000 troops inside of Ukraine, and that is more than enough to take the city. Do not think that that couldn't happen now because it didn't in 2022. The conditions are radically different now than they were then. That's what's at stake right now. We're still in the 11th hour. There hasn't neither one of these offensives in the north and south have started. There is still a chance at this late hour to finally say, holy crap, enough is enough. Let's have some sanity come back into the equation here. Let's do what makes sense and save and preserve what's left of Ukraine while there's still a few minutes left to accept a negotiated settlement. We'll see what's going to happen. We're going to continue to bring it to you here at Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Really appreciate you coming on today, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.